Data is getting bigger day by day, and it has a significant role in decision making for companies. Now, in order to handle these huge amounts of data, there is a need for database and database management systems. Now, in order to communicate with these databases, you need a tool. This is where SQL comes into picture. Would you like to ace the most frequently asked SQL interview questions during your campus placements to land in your dream company? Well, you're at the right place. And on that note, hello everyone, welcome to Simplilearn's YouTube channel. I hope you guys are doing good and staying safe. In this tutorial, we will be taking you through some most commonly asked SQL interview questions in 2022 and 2023. We'll look at some of the key things that you need to keep in mind while answering these interview questions. The general questions will revolve around key concepts like commands, constraints, joins, functions, transactions, and other database related questions. You may also get some scenario-based questions wherein the interviewer might ask you to write queries other than the theoretical questions, wherein the interviewer wants to test your knowledge in depth. So we'll be going through all these technicalities and see how to answer these questions in your next interview. But before we begin, if you're new to the channel and haven't subscribed already, consider getting subscribed to our channel Simplilearn to stay updated with all the latest tech content. And hit that bell icon to never miss an update from us. So without any further ado, let's get started. So the first question is, what is SQL and why it is used? SQL, or Structured Query Language, refers to a standard programming language utilized to extract, organize, manage, and manipulate data stored in relational databases. SQL is thereby referred to as a database language that can execute activities on databases that consist of tables made up of rows and columns. SQL commands are used to process, analyze, and manipulate the data that is stored in databases. SQL plays a crucial role in retrieving relevant data from databases by performing various operations like insertion, updation, modification, and deletion. SQL can manage several data transactions simultaneously where large volumes of data are written concurrently. So that is SQL and why it is used. Moving ahead, let us now discuss our next question, which is why we need a database. As the technology kept on advancing, the file system had become difficult to handle when the number of files increased and the volume of data also grew. This is where database comes into picture. The system was no longer able to store and retrieve data efficiently, and this created some limitations and drawbacks, and that is when we needed a new medium through databases. Now the problem with traditional file systems is we have data redundancy and inconsistency. Redundancy means when the same data is getting duplicated and repeated in different locations. This leads to excess and unwanted storage, which eventually results in inconsistency where the data in different files does not match with each other. Data isolation. Data is isolated because it is scattered in various files in different locations, and the files may be in different formats as well. At any point, writing new application programs to retrieve the appropriate data becomes difficult as the files are separated from each other in different locations. Limited data access. File storage systems usually do not have access for multiple users. This means multiple users at different places cannot access the data simultaneously. It becomes difficult to access important data if multiple users are searching at the same time. Security and integrity issues. Data is of paramount importance to anyone, and its privacy and its security is one of the most important things we need to consider. Data stored in files can be easily accessed and tampered, so it is important to prevent access to unauthorized users to hold the integrity of the stored data. So in order to eliminate all these drawbacks, we use a database which is further controlled by a database management system. Alright, moving ahead, the next question is, how does an SQL database works? Now, database store related information across multiple tables and allows you to query information using SQL commands. But the process, it is a bit of a hectic one, and in order to understand this in a simple way, I have put a flow diagram here where you can understand how the flow between the user and the SQL engine through the database server is happening. Now, a typical SQL database engine includes a storage engine, which is a database server, and the query processor within the SQL engine. Now, to retrieve the data, the query processor in the SQL engine accepts and executes SQL commands for the database server, which forwards to an application server. Now, this application server within the database processes the SQL request and sets it to a web server, where the user can access the information via SQL tables. If the required data is found in the tables that is present in the database server, it sends the information back to the user. In this way, one can find the data that is needed from the database by writing simple SQL queries. So this is how a traditional SQL database works. I hope you guys have understood. Let us now move ahead and discuss the next question, which is, what are the main usages of SQL? Or you might be asked, what are the features of SQL? Or you might be asked why we use SQL. Now, SQL is responsible for accessing and manipulating the data present in databases by writing simple SQL queries. Now, the main function or the main usages of SQL is it is used to execute query against a database. Now, by writing a simple query, you can perform complex operations to retrieve data from the database. You can also perform various operations like insert, update, and delete records. For example, if you have created a new table, you can insert records in that. Now, due to some reasons, if there is a modification or a change in the record, you can use the update statement to modify them. And finally, if you no longer want to process that data or show the data in that table, you can use the delete command to delete that data present in that table. And again, as discussed earlier, it is used to perform complex operations on the database like functions, by joining two or more tables, and etc. The next question is, what do you understand by tables and fields in a database? A table is a set of data that is organized in a model in the columns and rows format. Tables are considered as the fundamental level to store data in a relational database management system. It contains a header row at the top of the table, which gives the list of column names. Now, the tables contain rows and columns where the rows are known as records in general and the columns are known as fields. Now, a column is a set of data values of a particular type like numbers or alphabets. For example, if you consider the employee table here, which has employee ID, employee name, job, department number, salary in the column names, which is basically considered as the different fields. And we also have different records present in this table. Like if you consider the employee details of Rohan, whose employee ID is 1011, who's working as a data analyst. So fields are basically columns in a table with specific information about the data, and a record is basically an individual entry that exists in a table. Alright, the next question is, explain different types of commands in SQL. Now mainly there are 4 types of commands in SQL. The first one is data definition language or DDL. Data definition language helps you to define the database structure or schema. Data manipulation language or DML. DML allows you to modify the database instance by inserting, modifying, and deleting its data. Next, we have data control language or DCL. DCL gives access to the data stored in the database by granting and revoking permissions to the user. And finally, we have transaction control language or TCL. TCL commands deal with the transactions within the database. So these were some of the important and mainly used SQL commands. Now moving ahead, you might be asked to explain any one of the SQL commands in detail. So I've taken another question here which states that what are the statements used under DML commands. So you need to prepare accordingly and thoroughly so that interviewer want to know whether you have the in-depth knowledge of the SQL commands or not. Now typically under DML commands we have 4 statements. The first one is select. This command is used to fetch data from a database table. Next we have insert. Insert is used to insert data into a table of a database. Now if you have created a database and if you want to insert some record into it, you can use the insert statement. Next we have update. Update command allows modifying a data in the table. Now, as discussed earlier, if you want to make changes in your database, you can use the update statement, which basically updates the value in a given table. And finally, we have delete. This command allows deleting specific rows from the table. Now, if you no longer want the data to be present in your table, in that case, you can use the delete statement. Now, guys, we have select statement, which also comes under DQL command, which is data query language. But in most of the cases, we consider it under DML command as well, so you need not worry. So these are the 4 statements that come under DML commands. Moving ahead, the next question is, what are aggregate functions in SQL? Aggregate functions in SQL perform a calculation on multiple values and return a single value. Now, we have 5 different types of aggregate functions in SQL. The first one is count function. Count is used to basically count the total number of fields or number of data that you want from your table. Next, we have the average. Average is used to calculate the average of all the fields that are present in the table. Next, we have minimum and maximum. As the name suggests, they are used to find the maximum and minimum value while performing any complex or mathematical calculations from your table. And finally, we have sum, which is used to summarize or calculate the whole of the values that are present in the table. So these are some aggregate functions that are used in SQL. The next question is, what are constraints in SQL? Constraints are a set of rules imposed on tables of relational databases. Constraints help in maintaining the accuracy, integrity, and reliability of a database. Now we have total of 6 types of constraints that are present in SQL. The first one is unique. Unique constraint ensures that all the values in a column are different. Primary key. Primary key is a combination of a not null and unique constraint which basically uniquely identifies each row in a table. Next, we have foreign key. Foreign key uniquely identifies a row or record in another table. Next, we have default constraint. Default constraint sets a default value for a column when no value is specified. So if you're working on a database and if you haven't assigned a value into that record, it will automatically give a default value. Next, we have check constraint. Check basically ensures that all the values in a column satisfies a specific condition. And finally, we have not null. Not null ensures that a column cannot have a null value. So that was all about constraints and the different types of constraints that we use in SQL. Next question is, what are keys in SQL and why do we use them? SQL key is an attribute or set of attributes which help you to identify a unique row in a table. SQL keys are one of the most important attributes of any relational database because it plays important role to establish a relationship between 2 or more tables. It also helps queries to execute faster, that is, retrieval of the records from the database becomes much faster by using keys. Keys also set the different constraint to uniquely identify the tuples or rows from the large data sets. Alright, now once you're asked what are keys, the interviewer might ask what are different types of keys used in SQL. So you have to be prepared for that as well. Now in general, we have 4 different types of keys present in SQL. The first one is primary key. The primary key in SQL is a single or a group of fields or columns that can uniquely identify a row in a table. For example, employee ID or a student ID in a table is considered as a primary key because it uniquely identifies each and every record present in that table. Next, we have super key. A super key is a combination of all possible attributes which can uniquely identify rows or tuples in a table. Next, we have candidate key. Candidate key can be defined as a set of 1 or more columns that can identify a record or a tuple uniquely in a table. Foreign key. A foreign key is a set of attributes in a table that refers to the primary key of another table. So if you want to connect another table using the primary key of the existing table, then the key that is present in the new table is considered as the foreign key. Now for candidate key, let's say I have different fields like, let's say, Aadhaar card, passport, or driving license as fields present in my table, so which can uniquely identify a record uniquely similar to that of primary key. Now since candidate key is a set of 1 or more columns, we consider all of them as candidate keys. So I hope you've understood till now what are the different types of keys used in SQL. Alright, moving ahead, let us now discuss the next question, which is what are some common clauses used with select query in SQL? Now, as we know, SQL being a query language requires a method to apply constraints on the data, and for that we use clauses. SQL clauses are basically inbuilt SQL functions which allows us to apply certain restrictions on the data in a resultant set. Now, with the help of SQL clauses, we can filter the data according to our requirement, and it also reduces the complexity of a query, which helps in writing user-friendly queries which are easy to read and understand as well, which also ultimately allows us to restrict the number of outputs or the certain amount of data that we want in our resultant set. Now, let us now discuss some of the different types of clauses used in SQL. First, we have where clause. It is used to filter records in the database. Now, as you all know familiar that we have like thousands and thousands of records in our database. So if you want to filter only a particular records as per your requirement, then you can give a condition which can be done by using a where clause. Next, we have order by. Order by sorts the data either in ascending or descending order. Next, we have group by. Group by is used to group entries with identical data and can be used with aggregation functions or methods to obtain summarized database results. Next, we have having clause. Having clause basically filters the rows where aggregate values meet the specified conditions. Now, group by and having are almost similar to each other, so you can consider both of them to filter the records as per your requirement. Next, we have the limit, and again, as the name suggests, it is used to restrict the number of results from the query or the result in the resultant set. For example, if you have 100 records in your database, and if you want only 50 records to display in a resultant set, then in that case you can use the limit. And finally, we have the distinct clause, which is used to discard the rows having any duplicate values, which basically eliminates certain records that have any duplicate value. So if there are any records that are repeated in your table, then you can eliminate them by using distinct clause. So those are some of the common clauses that we use with select query. Alright, let us now discuss the next question, which is what is the difference between char and varchar data types? Now, I know you've all used both these data types extensively while working on your database, but due to how frequently we use them, many of us fail to recognize the differences when asked to choose between varchar and char in your interview questions. Now, the difference is important to know from both an interview point of view and from the standpoint of the database design as well when you're working on your database application, because a poor choice of data type from both these data types restricts the type of data you can add, which can ultimately waste space and slow down your query as well. So it is important that we understand the difference. Now, first difference between them is char is a fixed length character string data type and varchar is a variable length character string data type. And coming to char, this data type can be a single byte or a multiple byte, whereas varchar can accept character strings up to only 255 bytes. Now, character or char data type can be used when the character length is known. So if you're working or if you're specifying a column data type wherein you know the length of the character, in such case you can use the char. Whereas on the other side, varchar is a data type which is used when the character length is not clear. So for a string values, when the total number of character length is not known, in such case you have to take varchar. Now, char is used when the character length of the data is the same, whereas varchar is used when the character length of the data is changing, that is when it is variable. And finally, char is a static data type and varchar is a dynamic data type. So these are some of the main and important difference between char and varchar data types, and choosing between them is important that because it can ultimately affect your database performance. So it is important to choose the right data type. Alright, moving ahead, the next question is name few data types used in SQL. I hope you've come across this word data type in almost every programming language. So similar to those data types present in unlike any other programming languages, we do have certain data types which are similar in SQL as well. Now, as we know, a database table must have a name and data type for each column. So when building a table, an SQL developer must decide what kind of data will be stored in each column. So the data specifies how SQL will interact with the stored data and serves as a guide for SQL engine in determining what kind of data is expected inside of each column. So we have different data types like numeric data type, which has int type, bit, float, and boolean types of elements of data types. Next we have string data type, which contains char, varchar, and text data types. And next we also have date time data types, which takes different elements again, which has date format, which only takes the entry of date in year, month, date. We also have date time. We also have timestamp as well. Now, other than this, we have some miscellaneous and extra data types also. For example, XML and JSON formats in order to store the data in our tables as well. So these are some of the important data types used in SQL. I hope you guys have understood. Alright, moving ahead, let us now discuss the next question, which is explain the difference between group by and order by. Now, both these clauses are one of the important clauses in SQL as they are used to filter and sort the data as per our requirement. So it is also again important that how we use them and how they're specifically being used is important. So you have to understand the differences and when to use and when not to use. Now, coming to group by is used to group the rows that have the same value, whereas order by is used to arrange the data obtained as a result of a query in a sorted form. So let's say if you want to arrange the first 10 records in ascending order, then you can use the order by clause. Whereas if you're, let's say, want to group certain columns in a particular order, so then in that case you can use group by clause. Now group by always is used before the order by clause in the select statement, whereas order by is used after the group by clause in the select statement. So if you want to use a group by, you need to use before the order by, and similarly for order by also, it is always used after the group by. Next, group by attributes under aggregation function cannot be in group by clause, whereas attributes under aggregate functions can be in order by clause. Now it is also mandatory to use aggregate functions in the group by. So whenever you are performing aggregate functions like count, sum, average, minimum, and maximum, in such case you need group by. Whereas aggregate function is not compulsory as such to use an order by function. And finally, the important thing, group by controls the presentation of rows or tuples, whereas order by controls the presentation of columns. Alright, moving ahead, let us now discuss the next question, which is why do we use case statement in SQL? So the case statement in SQL is a way of handling the if-else statement that we use in other programming languages, which basically returns a value for the condition specified. Now it tests a list of conditions and returns one of the multiple possible results. So it is used to fetch us a particular value based on a certain condition in your database. So the case expression basically goes through conditions and return a value when the first condition is met, just like an if then else statement. So once a condition is true, it will stop reading and return the result. If no conditions are true, it returns the value in the else clause. And if there is no else part and no conditions are true, it will basically return a null value. So that is what an SQL case statement does in your SQL database. So for example, if you consider an example here, we have a query such as select employee ID, job title, salary, and we have to mention the keyword case, and it is always followed with a when and then keyword. So I'm specifying a condition here when salary is greater than or equals to 50,000. I want to display a string value, that is the salary is greater than 50,000. And if salary is equals to 50,000, I want to display a message as the salary is 50,000. And if both these conditions are not satisfying, then it will go to the else part, which will basically return the salary is under 50,000, and it will always end with an end as statement. So this is what case statement is in SQL and why do we use it. Alright, moving ahead, one of the most important questions, which is what are joins in SQL, and explain different types of joins. Now you might have come across the SQL joins key words in most of the cases, guys. They are one of the important statements in SQL which allows you to access information from two or more tables at once, which also keep our database normalized. Basically, normalization allows us to keep data redundancy low so that we can decrease the amount of data anomalies in our application when we delete or update a record. We'll get into that when we talk about normalization in detail. So you just have to understand that the join clause allows us to retrieve data from two or more related tables into a meaningful resultant set. So, for example, we'll understand with an example. Consider Mercedes-Benz, which is one of the largest automobile manufacturing companies in the world. So, let's say they're trying to access some information of their customers. Now, in their database, let us assume that they have three different tables of customer, an order table, and a vehicle table. Now, let's say they're trying to find a particular model type, which a customer has purchased in a recent time. So for that, in order to find that data, they have to go through three different stages. That is, first they have to find the customer table, and then they have to go to order table to find the order ID so that they can get into the vehicle ID details, and finally they'll fetch the model type, or let's say the variant from the vehicle orders. Now instead of that, I'll just simply join the two tables, that is the customer table and vehicle table, based on the common column that is present in this both table, which is customer ID. So with the help of this common field, I can retrieve the model and the variant instead of searching the three tables one at a time. So simultaneously I'm able to retrieve data by using common columns in both the table. So that is one of the most important USP, or the factor that a join does when you're trying to retrieve data from more than one table. So I hope you've understood what joins are, and let us now understand the different types of joins. Now the first join is inner join. The inner join returns only those records that have matching values from both the tables, that is the left table and right table. Next we have the outer or full outer join. Now outer join basically retrieves the data from both the tables irrespective of whether they are matching or not. So it will display the values either from left table or from right table. Now next we have the left join. As the name suggests, the left join gives priority to the first table or the left table or the first table. So it will retrieve only the records that are present in the left table and only the matching records that are present from the right table. And finally we have the right join. Right join basically retrieves the data from the right table or the second table and only the matching values from the left table or the first table. So these are some different types of joins we use in SQL. If you want to learn more about SQL joins, make sure to check out our SQL joins tutorial on our channel, where we have discussed the syntax and its use cases with a certain examples and its execution in MySQL Workbench as well. So I would highly recommend you to check that out. Alright, moving ahead, next question is, explain the difference between a join and a union in SQL. So now joins and unions can be used to combine data from one or more tables. Now the difference lies in how the data is combined. So in simple terms, joins combine data into new columns. If two tables are joined together, then the data from the first table is shown in one set of column alongside the second table's column in the same row. So if you look at this example where we have taken two tables, in our resultant tables, the columns are being added side by side. So each row in the result contains columns from both table A and B. Rows are created when columns from one table match columns from another. So this match is basically called the join condition. But when I speak about union combines data into new rows. In a union, each row within the result is from one table or the other. In a union, columns aren't combined to create results, but rows are combined. Unions are typically used when you have two results whose rows you want to include in the same result. That is, if you want to include the difference, the rows in your resultant set, then in that case you have to choose the union. So that was some of the main differences between the join and union statement. Alright, moving ahead, let us now discuss the next question, which is, what is the difference between delete and truncate? Delete command is used to delete only specified number of rows. That is, if you want to delete only specific rows like one or more rows, you can use the delete statement. Whereas the truncate command is used to delete all the rows in a single go from a table. Delete comes under DML command, that is data manipulation language, whereas truncate is a DDL command, which is data definition language. Now, there may be a where clause in the delete command in order to filter the records. Since we are specifying deleting only specified rows, we can use a where clause to limit the number of rows that we want to delete. whereas we do not have the option to use where clause in the truncate command, as it deletes all the rows simultaneously. Now when you use a delete, the changes can be rolled back. So once you delete certain records from the table, you can use the rollback statement to make changes again. Whereas if you use the truncate, the changes cannot be rolled back. Once you have deleted the records from the table, it will completely just vanish from the table, and you do not have the luxury to get back to its original state. That is, it cannot be rolled back. Now delete, on a performance side, delete is slower than truncate because we are individually deleting the rows, whereas truncate is faster than delete because we are deleting all the rows at a single time. So these were some of the main differences between delete and truncate. And one thing you have to keep in mind in that, when you're using truncate, you have to be careful, because once if you use the truncate and once the deletion is done, you cannot get back to its original state. That is, that changes can be rolled back. So it is very important that you choose these two statements wisely. All right, moving ahead, let us now discuss the next question, which is what are subqueries and how they're used in SQL. Now, subqueries in SQL are another important concept if you're trying to solve complex SQL queries. So in such case, subqueries can be quite handful. So you need to know what subqueries are. Now, as the statement says, as an SQL subquery is nothing but a query inside another query. And we use a subquery to fetch data from more than one table. That is, if you're retrieving data from one or more tables, we need subqueries. And a subquery is also often referred to as an inner query, while the statement containing a subquery is also called an outer query or outer select statement. We can implement subqueries with the select, insert, update, and delete statements, along with the operators like equals to, greater than, equals to, in between, and etc. Now consider an example here where I'm trying to find the listed price of all the items present in the orders table whose price is greater than the average of total listed price in that order table. So here the inner query becomes the select average listed price from the order table statement. So it basically calculates the result of this inner query first, and it passes on to the outer query. So let's say if I have the average of the listed price is 100, so the outer query basically selects the name, the listed price from the orders table whose listed price is greater than 100. So it will retrieve all the data whose price in order table is greater than 100. So in this way, you can use subqueries, to find complex or more, to find inferences of the complex queries by using a simple subquery. So I hope you understood what subqueries are. Let us now move ahead and discuss the next question, which is what is ACID property in a database? Now, to ensure that the database is in a consistent state both before and after the transaction, one needs to follow certain properties, and those properties are known as ACID properties. Now, where A stands for atomicity, C stands for consistency, I stands for isolation, and D stands for durability. Now, talking about atomicity, the concept of atomicity describes how the data stays atomic. So in other words, if an action or transaction is performed on the data, it should either be executed, completed, or not executed at all. So changes in the data must be like a single operation. Now, next we have the consistency. Consistency, the idea behind consistency is the value must constantly be maintained. Now, the integrity of the data should be upheld in DBMS or SQL, which means the changes done to the database should always be saved. Next, we have isolation. Now, the characteristic guarantees that numerous transactions can take simultaneously without causing the database state to become inconsistent. So, transaction takes place without interruption and independently. So, changes made in one transaction are not visible to changes made in any other transaction until the change in question has been committed or not. So isolation basically checks whether the transaction is getting successful in case of any system failures or not. And finally, we have durability. Now, durability, as the name suggests, something which a transaction done is permanent if it is durable. Durability in DBMS or SQL refers to the guarantee that data remains in the database permanently once an operation has been successfully completed. So these are the ACID properties that are present in a database, which are also quite useful when you're working on SQL database, because it should satisfy the condition in the tables that you're working on. Alright, moving ahead, let us now discuss the next question. What are common table expression in SQL. Now, a CT or common table expression defines a temporary result set that a user can refer possibly multiple times within a SQL statement. So if you're someone working on large databases and if you want to use the queries that you have already created, you can just simply make a common table expression wherein it enables user to write and maintain the queries easily with increased readability and reusability. Now, CTs are more readable than subquery, which makes it an go-to SQL statement or the concept. Now, CT basically increases the performance of the query. Now, instead of writing the query each and every time while you're working on a database, you can just simply already call the common table expression that you have created earlier. Now, the syntax of CT is written as with CT name, that is, you have to mention the CT name as within the parenthesis, select column 1, column 2 from tables and close the parenthesis and again mention the select statement, column 1, column 2 from CT name that you have written, and you can also mention the condition using the where clause. So that was all about the common table expressions in SQL. Alright, moving ahead, let us now discuss what is normalization in SQL. Again guys, normalization is a quite important concept. Even if you are working on a DBMS or SQL concepts, I think it is important to prepare well for your interviews, and this is one of the important question if you are preparing for that. Now, a normalization is basically the process to eliminate data redundancy and enhance data integrity in the table. So it basically is useful to have the data redundancy and inconsistency at place. It is basically a multi-step process that sets the data in a tabular form and removes the duplicated data from the relational tables. So, and also we have different types of normal forms, guys. So you need to prepare all of them, and interviewer might ask you one of the normal forms that is present. So we have 4 different types of normal forms such as 1NF, 2NF, 3NF, and PCNF. Now, a following question can be, to explain any of the normal form. Now, I'm considering here what is first normal form. So, for a table to be in first normal form, the atomicity of the table is 1. That is, every table should contain a single value and each and every record must be unique. Now, let us understand with an example here. Let's say I have a table of students which has roll number, name, age, courses as different fields. Now, as you can see, for one student, we have multiple courses present in the same record. So, we have for Hirsch, he has opted for courses SQL and Java. Now, as per the first normalization definition, it is not correct because it shouldn't have multiple values present in one record or one column. So we can eliminate this by converting into a separate row. That is, we might have repeated values, but it should be unique values. So I have written SQL and Java into separate columns in a resultant table, which basically satisfies the first normal form. Alright, moving ahead, let us now discuss the next question. What is the difference between SQL and MySQL? Now, the interviewer might want to understand your in-depth knowledge, whether you're understanding the differences between a MySQL, which is a relational database, and an SQL, which is a programming language. So the difference is basically SQL is a programming language, whereas MySQL is a relational database management system which is used to perform various operations like insert, update, delete on the data that is stored in the database. So SQL is a language which is useful in querying relational database system, and again, whereas MySQL is used to store, modify, and delete data in a database in an organized way. SQL is a licensed product of Microsoft, whereas MySQL is an open source platform managed by Oracle Corporation. SQL provides adequate protection to SQL servers against intruders, whereas MySQL, being an open source platform, we cannot guarantee the security as it is unreliable. Coming to SQL, it doesn't support any connectors, whereas in MySQL, we have various tools such as MySQL Workbench in order to build databases. So these are some of the major differences between the SQL and MySQL. The next question is, write an SQL query to find second highest salary from employee table. Now we all know to find the highest salary, we can simply use the max, aggregate function. So the following query would be select ID employee name, maximum of salary from employee. All right, but what if you want to find second highest salary? That is where a subquery comes into picture. You need to use a subquery to first find the select maximum salary from the table, and then you have to retrieve your particular columns, that is employee name, ID, or maximum salary from employee, where salary is less than that maximum salary. So something which is less than the max would be the second highest, right? So that is what the logic is, and we are doing that simply with use of subqueries here. Alright, moving ahead, let us now discuss the next question, which is explain the differences between where and having clause. So where clause is used to filter the records from the table based on specific condition, whereas having clause is also used to filter record from the groups based on a specific condition. Where clause can be used without group by clause, and having clause cannot be used without group by clause. Where clause implements in a row operation, whereas having clause implements in column operations. Now, in general, where clause cannot contain aggregate function, whereas in having clause, you can include various aggregate functions like count, sum, average, minimum, maximum, etc. And finally, where clause can be used with select, update, delete statement, while you cannot use any of this statement with having clause, where you can just only use the select statement. So that were the differences between where and having clause. The next question is write an SQL query to return even and odd number records from table. Now I hope you guys know the logic behind this. It is a simple SQL query. You just have to use the modulus operator, which returns the records with odd or even values. For that, we need to check the reminder when we divide the column value by 2. So when the reminder is 0, that is basically an even number. Otherwise, it's an odd number. So the query for even number records is select star from table where ID modulus 2 is equals to 0. And for odd number records, you need to write a query as select star from table where ID modulus 2 not equals to 0. Alright, the next question is what is the difference between a function and procedure? Functions and stored procedure are another important concept, but their way of implementation is a bit of similar. So, but you need to understand the differences on how they work. So, function basically returns a value. That is, it should always return a value when you're performing a complex function on your database table. And function can be called from a select query as well. And function is generally used to perform some calculation and always return a result. Whereas on the other hand, stored procedures cannot be used in SQL statements anywhere in the where, having, or select clause. Procedures can either return a single, multiple, or no values at all. That is, we have an optional condition here that procedure may or may not return values in the resultant set. Now, using stored procedure, we can prepare SQL code which you can save so that the code can be reused again and again, which is not with the case of function. So stored procedure can be quite helpful again if you're working on large data set and if you want to retrieve values and if you want to fetch data. In that case, stored procedure can be quite useful as you cannot, as you can use it simultaneously or multiple times. Alright, moving ahead, let us now discuss the next question, which is how to create a new table from an existing table. Now, creating a new table from an already created table is a bit of easy. You just have to use the create and select statement. So as it states, a copy of a table can be created from an existing table using the combination of both create and select statement. And the syntax is create table, mention the new table name as mention the select statement inside the columns that you want to retrieve from the already present table, that is from the existing table, and you can also mention the where. Now if you want only a particular column, in that case you can use the where condition. So that is how you can create a new table from an existing table. Again, this is a simple SQL query wherein the interviewer wants to know if you're having proper knowledge on the tables, like of creating a tables. Alright, the next question is, how is SQL different from NoSQL? Now you guys might have heard about NoSQL, which is basically trending a lot nowadays, where it is used to store a lot of unstructured data. Now as the data is increasing day by day, SQL has been in a downside where it is unable to store, a lot of unstructured data that is coming from the internet and from the, World Wide Web. So in that case, companies have switched to another technology which uses a new way of storing the data, be it unstructured or semi-structured data, which is NoSQL. However, there are differences between SQL and NoSQL. That is, SQL is a relational database. That is, it comprises of rows and columns in a table, and it is only stored in that format, while NoSQL is a non-relational database, which basically stores data in a key value pair or a document based or a graph based structured. And while SQL has a fixed schema design and structure, that is, you need to give the table structure, that is, you need to predefine the schema, that is your rows or your columns in hindsight, whereas NoSQL has a dynamic schema design and structure, that is, you need not provide a schema if you're working on NoSQL database. SQL handles complex queries, whereas NoSQL handles large volumes of data. So let's say if you have some data present in your table, and if you're constantly working on it and performing complex queries, in that case you need SQL to retrieve the data. Whereas if you're having large volumes of data, in that case you can use NoSQL. SQL is vertically scalable while NoSQL is horizontally scalable. Now, from what do I mean, scalable is basically as a term used in database, whereas scalability is the ability to expand or contract the capacity of system resources in order to support the ever-changing usage of your applications. Now, when I talk about vertical scaling, it refers to increasing the processing power of a single server or cluster. Now, both relational as well as the non-relational database can scale up, but eventually there will be a limit in terms of maximum processing power and throughput. Whereas the horizontal scaling, also known as the scale-out method, refers to bringing on additional nodes to start the ring. That is, you can even add CPUs and RAMs to your existing server. Now, this is difficult with relational databases because due to difficulty in spreading out related data across the nodes, but with non-relational database or with SQL, this is made simpler since collections which we use in NoSQL are self-contained and are coupled relationally. And finally, SQL follows asset property that we have already discussed in our previous question, which is what is asset property, and whereas NoSQL follows cap property. So these were some of the main difference between the traditional SQL language and the new or the emerging technology that is NoSQL. Alright, moving ahead, the next question is, write an SQL query to find the nth highest salary from a table. Now, if you're a beginner or someone working as an SQL developer, even to an intermediate level, finding first, second, third highest salary can be quite easy, using subqueries or functions. But whereas to find the nth highest salary, you need a bit of more of assistance. So using a subquery, you can find the highest salary, wherein the query is written as select salary from employees as employee 1, where n minus 1. Now here n basically denotes the nth highest salary that you want to calculate. Let's say if I want to find the 35th highest salary, you need to mention 35 in the n place, equals to select count distinct salary from employees as employee 2. I'm giving an alias name here, where employee 2 dot salary is greater than employee 1 dot salary. Now the logic behind this is I'm basically self-joining the same table again, and I'm comparing the two tables, wherein it will compare the salary from the second table, which is greater than the first salary, and it will retrieve the data in the resultant set. Now you can use this or do this in another way using the limit clause. The query is written as select star from employees, where salary is equals to select distinct salary from employees, order by salary, limit n comma 1. Now this is applicable in most of the databases that you're working on, like MySQL, SQL Server, or even Oracle as well, where you just have to specify the n value and use a limit clause, and it will do the rest. So Let's say if I want to find 50th highest salary, in place of n, I can basically put 50 also. And we can also find the nth highest salary using the row number function. Now, if you want to know in detail on how to use the row number function and the syntax of it, you can check out our video on how to find nth highest salary from a table in our channel, where we have discussed clearly on how to use various different methods and especially how to use the row number function as well. So I'd highly recommend you guys to check that out. All right, moving ahead, the next question is name the operator which is used for pattern matching in SQL. Now, SQL like command or operator is used to find a specific character in a database. So it basically determines whether a specific character that you're mentioning matches a pattern string or not. Now, this is used to perform complex pattern search in data wherein you don't know the complete information that you're working on the data. So just with the help of some certain specifics or specific characters that I'm talking here about, you can basically retrieve the data. The syntax is followed as select column 1, column 2, column n from table name where column name like pattern. Let us just understand this an example where again you can have a follow-up question for this, where it is where the interviewer can ask you write an SQL query to fetch the employees whose name begins with any two characters followed by a text RA, which is basically two characters, and ends with any sequence of characters. Now, in general, we have two different like operators, which is underscore and percentage wildcard characters, where underscore matches a single character and percentage matches 0 or multiple characters. So the answer to this query is basically select employee name from employees where employee name like within the parenthesis. Now as the question is stated as it should begin with any two characters. So I can basically put an underscore here for the first two places followed by a text which is RA, and it can end with any number of characters. So let's say if I have Murali whose name starts with M and the next character is U. So you can take it as MURA and it can end with any characters, again LI. So Murali is an example for this. Or else you can take Surat. Again, you can have two different characters at the first position and it can end with any number of characters at the end. So this is how you can use like operator in order to fetch certain patterns when you're not aware of the string or the data that you are trying to retrieve from the database table. Alright, moving ahead, let us now discuss the next question, which is explain what is an alias in SQL and why we use it. Now, I'm sure you know what the term alias is. It is giving a temporary name to someone. So similarly in SQL also, it is basically a temporary name that is given to a table or a column while writing a query. Now, alias can be quite useful because let's say if you're working on a database and if the columns or the table names are so long, now you have to write or type the database table again and again in such long format. So instead of that, I can simply write a alias name for that. Now let's say I have employee details as my table name. Now instead of writing every time employee details, I can just give another alias name like EMP or EMP details. So giving aliases makes the table or column name more readable as well. Now if you're using alias, it is a temporary change, guys. So it is just limited to the runtime of the query wherein you are executing a query. So it will just give alias name for only that moment and it is not permanently saved. So if you're performing for column operations, the alias can be used as select column name as alias name from table. And if you are giving an alias name for table, you can write a select column 1 or column so on up to n columns from table name as alias name. Alright, let us now discuss the next question, which is explain views in SQL. Now, a database view in SQL is like having virtual tables containing a single query and its result. Now, the result is usually a virtual table which is having the same amount of rows and columns just like the actual table. So we can either pass a query to store all the rows and columns of a table or just a part of it. Now, the most significant advantage of using a view in SQL is that it also stores the query, and hence we don't have to write it again and again from the scratch. But again, then the question arises, why not use a stored procedure instead? Now, even the stored procedures can hold a query and execute whenever called. However, the advantage with views is that they're easier and more straightforward compared to procedure. And the query is written as create view name as select column 1, column 2, up to so on column n. From, you can write a single table or from multiple tables as well. You also use a where condition. So we can just easily create a view in SQL from a single table or even multiple tables using the create view statement. But before anything else, we need to already have a table so that we can create a view for it. So that was views in SQL and how they are used. All right, the next question is, what are triggers in SQL? So a trigger is basically a stored procedure, which is a set of SQL statements saved under a name, just like a function, or even when you're writing, views, which takes a temporary name so that it can be reused. That is, triggers can be executed that are automatically, called on when there is any change in the database. Now, for instance, you may program a trigger to execute when data is inserted in a table. Now we have different types of triggers as well based on the event and the timing of it. So we have different DML triggers, we have DDL triggers and database triggers. So now in DML we have insert, update and delete. And in DDL triggers we can use create and alter statements. Now the timing is also important when you're triggering certain event. That is, you can use before trigger. That is, you can use before insert trigger. That is, whenever you're trying to insert a new record, if it is not satisfying the condition that you have specified, then it will omit. So it basically backfires before the specified event has occurred. Similarly, you can use after trigger as well, which basically fires after a specified event has already occurred. So that was triggers in SQL. So an immediate following question would be why we use SQL triggers. Being an advanced level concept, the interviewer might want to know the in-depth knowledge of what SQL triggers are. So SQL triggers allows the user to avoid redundant code with multiple programs need to perform the same database operations. It also maintains complex column constraints and inferential data integrity, and also it prevents invalid transactions and makes sure that the user that is authenticating a transaction is being successfully executed. And finally, it increases the performance of the SQL queries because it does not need to compile each and every time when the query is getting executed. So those were some of the main reasons why we use SQL triggers. All right, moving ahead, let us now discuss the next question, which is what is indexing in SQL? Now, indexing in SQL is a special table used to speed up the searching process of the data in a database table. Now, let's say if you're working on thousands and thousands of records, it becomes quite difficult, if you try to retrieve certain data, which ultimately impacts the performance of the query. Now, let's take an example here. Now, you all might have, done this in your school days, wherein you have this textbooks, and in textbooks you have table of contents. Now, if you want to refer to a particular chapter, instead of searching from page 1 and simultaneously moving on to the next pages, you can just check the index page where you can find the number. Now, let's say in the example, I want to find the concepts of the neuroscience of hospitality, which has an index 62. So instead of searching from the start, I can just turn on to the 62nd page and just refer to the contents that are present in that chapter. So similarly in SQL as well, instead of searching, the whole table, you can just speed up the process by using an index. So the main benefit of using indexing is it improves query speed as discussed, and faster data recovery is also another factor while using indexing. And also the efficiency, that is the search efficiency of the query increases, wherein the performance of the database ultimately impacts on how you're running the query. Now, the more complex the queries, the more performance it takes, which ultimately impacts the efficiency. So if you're trying to perform data operations on more than 1,000 records, or let's say 1 lakh records in a table, in that case you can use index. And that brings us to the final question, guys, which is, what are the applications of SQL in real life? Nowadays, SQL has been in a tremendous usage for more than many sectors in real life as well. For example, if you take banking sector is an important criteria for our nation for its development. So banking uses SQL, and it is one of the major components in banking sector, where bank stores the account details of customers and the transactions done in the database on a regular basis. It is also used in education sectors like schools and universities, where the users or the people in authorization use SQL and databases to store and retrieve information about their students, faculty, and staff information. Next, we have finance. Finance is another massive area where SQL queries are used regularly in managing the assets, revenue details, shares of the companies. Now, faster execution and retrieval of data plays an important role for all the businesses around the world to make strategies and derive insights from it. And for that, we need SQL to retrieve the data as early as possible. And next, we have healthcare. Again, hospitals and other medical centers use SQL to store the details of the patients without any hassle. It also helps in maintaining all the documents, necessary bills, as well, etc. Manufacturing is another important sector where SQL is used, and considering the vast presence in the market, manufacturing also uses SQL in order to find the data from the machinery, the employees that are working in a particular manufacturing plant, and etc. It is also widely used in travel also, in order to store the details of the customers. Let's say if they have any offers to be presented in real time, we use SQL in order to store all of this in no time. And finally, we have e-commerce as well. Now, companies like Amazon, Flipkart, considering its vast presence in the market, retail and e-commerce company stores its customer data to improve their shopping experience by providing special offers, which in turn helps the business to grow. So these are some of the applications of SQL in real life. I hope you guys have understood. And that brings us to the end of today's tutorial, guys. I hope you all understood all the SQL interview questions, which are of basic and intermediate level, that are necessary to crack your next interview. Thank you for watching the video, guys. If you found this tutorial informative and helpful, give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. If you have any further queries regarding any of the topics covered in today's session, feel free to let us know in the comment section below, and a team of experts will be more than happy to help resolve all your queries at the earliest. Until next time, stay safe and keep coding.
Hi there, if you like this video, subscribe to the Simplilearn YouTube channel and click here to watch similar videos. To nerd up and get certified, click here.